A decade ago, in a small, quiet town, 5 12-year-old children mysteriously vanished. The air was crisp with the scent of autumn, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the laughter of children filled the streets. But when dusk fell, a chilling silence took its place. Parents began to worry when their kids didn't return home by the usual time. The missing children were out from 4 p.m. until midnight, and their absence sparked fear and panic among the community. When the children finally returned, they looked different. They were disheveled and seemed distant, their faces pale and eyes wide with a haunting expression. None of them spoke about what had happened during those long hours in the woods. When the police arrived, they were desperate for answers. Officers questioned the children, trying to piece together the night's events. "Did you see anyone in the forest?" one officer asked, kneeling to be at eye level with the scared kids. "Did someone hurt you or force you to go with them?" The children remained silent, their lips sealed tight. However, their eyes betrayed them. 4 out of the 5 boys looked terrified yet responsive, their gazes darting nervously between the authorities and their worried parents. They kept stealing glances at the 5th boy, their fear palpable. The 5th boy, named Sam, seemed completely different from the others. While his friends were scared and shaking, Sam appeared lost in another world. His eyes stared blankly into the darkness, fixated on something far beyond their reach. No matter how hard his mother tried to turn his face to hers, his gaze remained locked on the shadows that danced at the edge of the tree line. When the police observed Sam, they noted his cold, clammy skin, and his hair was tangled and wild. A dark, viscous liquid stained his lips and chin, and large tear streaks marred his clothes, suggesting he had been through a terrible ordeal. Strangely, his skin bore no marks or wounds. All he said was that he was tired and wanted to go home. With heavy hearts, the parents took their children home, hoping to piece together the fragments of that horrifying night. The following day dawned, but it was not the peaceful morning everyone had hoped for. Instead, the town was awakened by the blaring of police sirens echoing through the streets, cutting through the morning calm. Residents peered outside their windows, confused and alarmed at the sight of local law enforcement racing toward the boys' neighborhood. As the day unfolded, the town would learn of a tragedy far worse than anyone could have imagined. The 5th boy had killed his mother and fled into the woods. His father, who had left for work early that morning, realized he had forgotten his wallet and made a quick U-turn back home. When he stepped inside, a terrible instinct washed over him. The house felt wrong, and the air was thick with an unfamiliar, horrific scent. Rushing to the kitchen, he froze at the sight before him. There, in a horrific tableau, he found his son standing over his wife, a knife in hand, blood pooling around her body. The boy's eyes were wide with shock and terror. "Dad, what have I done?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Before his father could respond, the boy dashed out the back door, tears streaming down his face. The father didn't chase him. Instead, he knelt beside his wife, desperate to save her, until the police arrived. It didn't take long for officers to find the boy. He lay tangled in the underbrush, 100 yards deep in the woods. A knife wound marred his abdomen, and for reasons no one could understand, he had ended his own life. Nearby, etched into the bark of a tree, were the words, "I'm so sorry, Dad. It's all over." The sheriff of the town and one of the remaining boys' fathers rushed home to speak with their son. The sheriff had a gut feeling that the events of the previous night were linked to this tragedy. He needed answers, but for the longest time, he couldn't get anything out of his child. The boy sat in silence, his eyes downcast, until the sheriff decided to tell him what happened to his friend. As he spoke Sam's name, something shifted within the boy. He finally began to share the story. "We were playing in Sam's backyard while his dad was at work," he started, his voice trembling. "Just behind the yard was a huge forest. It was a place we loved to explore, but that day felt different." The boy explained how they had been having fun, tossing a ball and laughing, when they started to think about heading home. Just then, a girl appeared from the trees. She wore a beautiful white dress that shimmered in the fading sunlight. "Do you want to play with me?" she asked, her voice sweet and inviting. The boys were captivated, drawn in by her charm and innocence. They had never seen her before, and her presence felt almost magical. Sam spoke up first, a smile on his face. "Sure. What do you want to play?" The girl grinned, a delighted look lighting up her face. "Try and catch me," she called, before darting back into the woods. Without hesitation, the boys chased after her, their laughter ringing through the trees. But as they ran deeper into the forest, the sun began to set. It was then that they realized they had lost their way. Panic started to creep in. "Where are we?" Jordan asked, glancing around at the unfamiliar trees. The boys turned to retrace their steps, but everything looked different. The woods felt alive, shifting and changing as darkness fell. They wandered through the dense underbrush, fear tightening their chests. After a while, they stumbled upon a strange light flickering in the distance. "What is that?" Tyler asked, squinting into the dark. They approached cautiously, finding an old, rickety shack illuminated by candles. The outside was adorned with strange symbols and words, glowing eerily against the night sky. Feeling a mix of fear and curiosity, the boys hesitated at the door. They knocked, and to their surprise, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, they found a single room, and their eyes widened in horror. Bones of different creatures hung from the ceiling, glistening in the flickering light of a fire in the corner. At the center of the room was a large wooden table, and an old woman sat behind it. She had a toothless grin that sent shivers down their spines, and her black eyes seemed to bore into their very souls. "Come in, children," she croaked, her voice as brittle as dry leaves. The children felt an inexplicable force urging them to step inside. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," Sam said, his voice trembling, "but we're lost, and we want to go home." The old woman turned her head unnaturally to face him, her gaze intense and predatory. "I can help you with that," she said slowly. "But first, you must help me." Fear flooded the boys as they exchanged terrified glances. They felt themselves being drawn further into the room, compelled to take a seat at the table. "Please, let us go home," Sam pleaded. "Have a seat, children," she replied, stretching her grotesquely long arms to beckon them closer. Her skin looked old and twisted, and the sight made their stomachs churn. The boys hesitated, but felt unable to resist the pull of her voice. They reluctantly took their seats around the table. The woman's crooked arms folded beneath the table, and she produced a wooden box with an old iron lock. "Before I ask for my bargain, would any of you like something?" she asked, her smile remaining unchanged. The boys looked at each other, fear glinting in their eyes. They shook their heads, terrified of what the old woman might ask for in return. "Good," she said, her voice turning dark and gravelly. "Then let me begin." The old woman leaned forward, her long fingers moving with an unsettling grace as she shifted the box to face the boys. They felt the weight of her gaze upon them, and the air in the room grew thick with tension. With every word that tumbled from her lips, they felt their resolve weakening. "I've been waiting for children like you," she said, her voice low and filled with an eerie excitement. "You can help me, and in return, I can give you what you desire most." "What do you mean?" Jordan asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman leaned closer, her eyes glinting in the dim light. The forest holds many secrets, and I know how to unlock them. You just have to give me something in return. What do you want from us? Tyler asked, his voice shaking with fear. She smiled wider, revealing her toothless gums. Nothing too severe, just a piece of your spirit. The boys exchanged panicked glances, realizing the danger they were in. They felt the pull of the woods around them, the darkness pressing closer, as if the trees themselves were listening. I don't want to give you anything, Sam stammered, feeling a surge of courage. The woman's expression darkened. You have no choice, she hissed, her voice echoing in the tiny room. The forest demands a price. Suddenly, the candles flickered wildly, and the walls of the shack seemed to close in. The boys felt a cold wind sweep through the room, chilling them to the bone. Run! Sam shouted, and they bolted from their seats, crashing through the door and into the night. They ran through the woods, the darkness swallowing them whole. Branches clawed at their skin, but they didn't stop. They could hear the old woman's cackling laughter echoing behind them, chasing them deeper into the shadows. Finally, they stumbled out of the trees and into the safety of Sam's backyard. Gasping for breath, they collapsed on the grass, heart pounding. They thought they were safe, but the experience haunted them. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him. The shadows in the woods seemed to whisper his name, and every night he dreamt of the old woman's cold eyes and her promise of power. As days turned into weeks, the boys struggled to return to their normal lives. They tried to forget what had happened, but they could feel the forest calling to them, a dark lure they couldn't resist. One evening, after school, Sam gathered the others and made a decision. We have to go back, he said, his voice firm. We have to face her. But what if she's waiting for us? Jordan asked, fear creeping back into his voice. We can't let her control us, Sam insisted. We have to confront her and put an end to this. With heavy hearts, the boys agreed, and as twilight settled over the town, they ventured into the woods once more. The trees loomed ominously, and the air was thick with tension. They arrived at the shack, its door creaking open as if inviting them in. Heart pounding, they stepped inside, the familiar scent of decay washing over them. The old woman was waiting, her crooked smile welcoming yet sinister. Back for more, are we? She crooned, her voice dripping with malice. I wondered if you would return. We're here to end this, Sam declared, stepping forward with newfound courage. The woman's laughter filled the room, echoing off the walls. You think you can defeat me? You belong to the forest now. But we're not afraid of you, Sam replied, his voice steady. We refuse to give you our spirits. With a sudden movement, the old woman lunged for them, but the boys stood their ground. Drawing strength from one another, they chanted the names of their loved ones, their families, and the life they wanted to protect. As they spoke, a powerful light enveloped them, pushing back against the shadows that loomed in the shack. The woman's expression shifted from glee to anger, her voice rising in fury. No, you cannot escape, she shrieked, but it was too late. The light consumed her, filling the room with warmth and banishing the darkness that had haunted them for so long. When the light faded, the shack was gone, replaced by the familiar trees of the forest. The boys stood together, relieved and free. They felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from their souls. We did it, Jordan whispered, tears of joy streaming down his face. Yes, Sam replied, a smile breaking across his face. We're free. From that day on, the boys carried the memory of their ordeal with them, a reminder of the strength they found in each other. They learned that true power came not from darkness, but from the light they created together. The woods no longer felt like a place of fear. Instead, they became a symbol of courage and friendship, and the town slowly healed from the tragedies of the past. As they grew older, the boys would often return to that forest, not to confront the darkness, but to celebrate their bond, remembering that they had faced the shadows and emerged stronger together. "I have 4 gifts in this chest for you, and 1 for me." The woman's voice hung in the air, filled with a mix of mischief and something darker. The boys exchanged nervous glances, their young minds struggling to understand her words. "But there are 5 of us," Ross whispered, a hint of confusion lacing his voice. The woman's head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing like a hawk's as she fixed her gaze on him. They felt like daggers piercing through the dim light of the room. "Only 4 will be going home," she said with a chilling chuckle. Her laughter echoed in the cramped space, mingling with the crackling sounds of the fire and the flickering candlelight. The boys sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of her words. The warmth from the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, but the atmosphere felt heavy with a sense of foreboding. Each child could feel their heart thudding in their chest, the sound pounding louder as fear gripped them. They wanted to run, to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but their legs felt like lead. With a few taps from her long, pointed fingers, the wooden chest creaked open, revealing its contents. Hay lined the bottom, and 5 strange items lay on top, each one glistening in the dim light. The first was the head of an old doll, its once cheerful face now faded and cracked. As the boys stared, the doll's eyelids flickered to life, opening wide to reveal glassy, lifeless eyes that seemed to gaze blankly at the ceiling. It sent a shiver down their spines. Next was a penny, scratched and worn, its luster lost over the years, but it looked ordinary enough. Then came a large black button, its smooth surface glimmering in the candlelight, casting an eerie reflection that seemed to draw the boys closer. Beside it, a piece of chocolate wrapped in crinkly white cloth sat invitingly. The last item was a bright yellow dandelion, freshly picked and vibrant against the dullness of the other objects. Its petals glowed like sunshine, contrasting sharply with the rest of the items. "Please, each of you take one. No need to spoil the surprise," the old woman urged, her neck twisting to fix her gaze on Sam, the leader of the boys. Sam met her look with pure hatred, a spark of defiance burning in his eyes. Without hesitation, he reached for the doll's head, fully aware of the curse that might come with it. He felt the cold porcelain in his grip, and the other boys watched, transfixed and frightened. As soon as Sam touched the doll's head, its eyes rolled back, and a soft, sinister giggle filled the air. "Sally always likes to play," the old woman cackled, her voice dripping with glee. "She'll do anything to keep her playmates safe and well-fed." The boys exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that this was not just a game. Next up was Ross. He took the piece of candy, glancing at the ancient woman across the table. "Enjoy the taste, my dear," she said with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure there will be more surprises in the future." Ross swallowed hard, feeling a chill creep up his spine. Tyler, feeling a strange compulsion, reached for the black button. It was larger than he expected, fitting snugly in his palm. As he turned it over, he gasped at the sight of his own reflection staring back at him. "An eye for an eye, my child," the old woman said, her voice low and eerie. Tyler's heart raced as he felt an inexplicable connection to the button. Next, a quieter boy took the penny, inspecting it closely. It felt unremarkable in his hand, a simple piece of metal with no special properties. But as he held it, a wave of unease washed over him. Finally, Jordan was left with the dandelion. As soon as he picked it up, the old woman's gaze snapped to him. Her interest peaked. "And I have my reward right there," she said, rising from her chair. She stretched her lanky body toward the ceiling, her movements unnatural and fluid, like a spider weaving its web. The rest of the boys felt a shiver run down their spines. "The rest of you may leave," she commanded, her hands reaching forward to cradle Jordan's face. A tear slipped down his cheek as he realized what was happening. The remaining children stood up, their legs trembling beneath them. One by one, they left the dim room, their hearts heavy with dread. Only Sam and Jordan remained. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Sam muttered, but his words were not directed at Jordan. He quickly tossed the doll's head to the last boy, who caught it with trembling hands. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted, the old woman's smile widened, but the joy in her eyes faded. "Run!" Sam shouted, panic flooding his voice. Jordan, jolted into action, shot out the door, joining the others as they fled the den. They followed the dirt path back to their homes, hearing high-pitched screams echoing behind them. Each step felt heavier than the last, their legs burning with exhaustion as they pushed themselves to keep running. The night air was thick with tension, their breaths coming out in quick, sharp gasps. They had run for what felt like an eternity, their bodies begging for rest, but fear propelled them forward. Just when they thought they could catch their breath, a fluttering sound emerged from above them. A dark shape swooped down from the night sky, landing on the path ahead of them. It was the old woman, her hunched figure looming ominously between them and their homes. The dim light of the moon illuminated her pale face, making her look even more ghostly. Her skin hung loosely from her bones, and her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, a grotesque smile splitting her face. The children froze in fear, unable to comprehend the horror before them. The woman took a step toward them, her movements jerky and unnatural. "How dare you?" she screeched, her voice filled with fury. She pointed a long, bony finger directly at Jordan. He felt an icy grip of terror as he stood frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The other boys backed away, their hearts racing with fear, their minds screaming for them to run. With a sudden lurch, the woman lunged forward, her fingers stretching toward Jordan. As soon as she was within arm's reach, she leapt into the air, engulfing him in her dark cloak. The boys could only watch in horror as she wrapped him in shadows, pulling him into the depths of her darkness. The sound of his screams filled the air, haunting and desperate. The boys stood there, paralyzed, feeling a mix of terror and guilt as they abandoned him. They turned and ran, their feet pounding against the dirt path, the echoes of Jordan's cries fading behind them. The forest seemed to close in around them, darkness enveloping the path as they fled. After what felt like an eternity of running, they finally reached the edge of the forest and stumbled into the safety of their town. They were out of breath and filled with a sense of relief that quickly turned into confusion. To their shock, they discovered that not just 4 of them had made it back, but all 5. Somehow, Jordan had caught up with them, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "I swear, I only heard 4 sets of footsteps," Sam said, shaking his head in disbelief. The others nodded, feeling the weight of the night's events pressing down on them. But as they looked around, they realized something was off. Jordan stood silently, his gaze distant and unfocused, as if he were somewhere else entirely. Sam's father, a sturdy man with a frown etched deep on his face, noticed something was wrong with his son. "What happened out there?" he demanded, but the boys couldn't find the words. They were too shaken, too terrified to speak of the horrors they had witnessed. The next day, Sam's father organized a search party, determined to uncover the truth. They combed through the woods, searching for anything out of the ordinary, a path, a cabin, or signs of a missing child. But after hours of searching, they found nothing. The woods were silent, offering no clues, no answers. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the case was slowly forgotten. Sam and his friends tried to move on, but the memory of that night haunted them. Jordan, once lively and full of laughter, had changed. He became withdrawn, lost in his thoughts, and the boys could feel the darkness around him. Months went by without any signs of the old woman or the cabin. Life in the town returned to normal, but the boys were forever changed. They had faced a nightmare and emerged, but not unscathed. As time passed, they grew apart. Years later, Sam turned to drinking, hoping to numb the pain of that night. Tyler moved to the farmlands, seeking solace in the open fields far from the dark woods. Kane left for the city, trying to escape the memories that haunted him. I stayed here. My name is Ross, and I saw everything. I watched as fear tore apart our friendship, as each of us struggled to cope with the weight of what we had witnessed. The night in the old woman's den marked the end of our childhood innocence, a turning point that left scars deeper than any of us could comprehend. I remember the way the air felt that night, thick with tension and fear. The flickering candlelight danced across our faces, illuminating the uncertainty in our eyes. We were just kids, after all, thrown into a nightmare we couldn't escape. As I sit here, reflecting on those events, I wonder what really happened to Jordan that night. Was he ever truly with us again? Or had the old woman taken a part of him, leaving us with a shadow of the boy we once knew? The questions linger in my mind, haunting me like the ghost of that night. The laughter of the boys who once played together feels like a distant memory, replaced by the echoes of our fears. We were forever marked by that experience, and as much as we tried to move on, the darkness of the forest remained with us, a constant reminder of the horrors we faced. And so, as I share this story, I hope others can learn from our mistakes, to never underestimate the darkness that lurks in the shadows, and to cherish the light while it lasts. Because once you step into the darkness, it can consume you in ways you never imagined.